Note that due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Commission is meeting virtually. The meeting is being streamed live on the Port's YouTube channel. If you have a question or comment, please use the raise hand function to ensure everyone has an opportunity to speak. I'll call for a motion and second to grant a leave of absence to Commissioner Lamb, who's out of town.
I so move.
Second.
Thank you. Pam, would you lead us through a roll call vote, please?
Yes, Commissioners Alexander,
Present.
Cooper Thomas,
Aye.
Levy,
Aye.
McDonald, Nemi,
Present.
O'Halloran,
Aye.
Samput,
Aye.
and Strader.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now call for a motion and second for approval of the minutes of the regular commission meeting of July 14, 2021. Pam? I'm sorry, a motion and second first.
So moved. Second.
Thank you.
Commissioners Alexander,
Aye.
Cooper Thomas,
Aye.
Levy,
Aye.
McDonald,
Aye.
Nemi,
Aye.
O'Halloran,
Aye.
Samput,
Aye.
and Strader.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Curtis, would you share the executive director's report, please?
I will. Thank you. Good morning, Madam President. Good morning, Commissioners. And just a quick welcome as well to our new Port employees. A number of us just visited with them. I got to spend some time with them last week. They got to see my black lab being a pest in the background of my video call. I know they, like all of us, look forward to the time when we can get back into Port facilities for commission meetings. Let me start by acknowledging again the Port's monthly safety champions. Again, we identify each month Port employees who are taking the lead in watching out for each other, watching out for our customers and partners, essentially trying to keep each other safe. You'll see Chris and Jackie and Dave here on the screen. Really want to shout out to them. Thank you, three of you, for really taking the lead in safety. Stan, would you give us a safety message for the day, please?
I will. My message today is to highlight the Port of Portland's participation in OSHA's Safe and Sound Week, which is this week. Safe and Sound Week is a nationwide OSHA event held each August that recognizes the successes of workplace safety and health programs while offering information and ideas on how to keep America's workers safe. The Port is one of 18 Oregon employers signed up to participate in this nationwide event. The safe and sound emphasis areas are management leadership, worker participation, find and fix hazards, and having better safety conversations among employees. This year, the Port seeks to energize the underlayment of our safety program, which is find, report, and fix hazards. Finding and fixing hazards in the workplace is an ongoing process that helps proactively identify and control sources of potential injuries or illnesses. The Port tracks and measures hazard reporting, and employees are encouraged to report through our corrective action program to track corrective actions to closure, drive leading metrics, and allow for organizational learning. Seen on screen is the Port's Report a Safety Hazard or Near Miss decal with quick response or QR code to assist employee reporting directly into the corrective action program tool. These decals are stuck on equipment, hard hats, vehicles, coffee mugs throughout the Port enterprise to enable easy employee reporting on site during their workday. When an employee enters a hazard or near miss report, they get an email receipt from the corrective action program system, and the safety team is emailed immediately to initiate mitigation measures. The Port is engaging employees through safety committee meetings to be even more active in reporting concerns, hazards, and near misses this fiscal year. We recognize the value of these contributions and offer incentives to employees for continued safety engagement. Competency in this crucial area is a trait of successful safety and health programs to ensure that workers go home after every shift to their families, safe and sound. Curtis, that's my message today.
Terrific, Stan. Thanks so much. I love the code. I actually have it here on the back of my iPad, so I can scan it myself. I just think it's a great system. Thank you very much for the message this morning. Just by way of update, mask requirements and return to office plans, as I think everybody knows, the Delta variant has created a whole new set of issues for us, both as an operator and as an employer. And we're just trying to keep our focus on keeping safe, doing our best to keep our travelers and business partners and contractors safe as well. In light of recommendations from the CDC and the Oregon Health Authority and now Multnomah County, and I believe later today the state, we've reinstated indoor mask requirements effective immediately. That's at all port facilities for all employees, regardless of vaccination status. We've also pushed our return to office plans out at least until October, but I suspect it'll go beyond that. We are really just going to play it by ear and try to keep the lines of communication open with our employees so they know how to plan around return to office for those folks who aren't already on site. Very exciting opening of the rental car center right next to the parking garage on the PDX site. Our teams have started moving into the new rental car center or RCC building, started last month. We're really grateful to have this outstanding mix of employees and contractors who came together to make it happen. The phased moves aren't going to wrap up until sometime late in September, with paging and communication center being the last few into the new structure. But I was there just before employees started moving in, and it looks terrific. I think you'll all be very impressed. The rental car space on the ground floor is really beautiful, and I think PDX customers are going to find it much more welcoming and supportive of their needs as they rent cars on site. We've also had a bit of action in the evenings between what's got to be 1 and 4 a.m. Over the last 2 weeks, in the middle of the night, a crane has been located in the alleyway to reach over the airport and pick up these really large pieces of HVAC ductwork from the upper roadway and place them safely on top of the ticket lobby roof for future installation. That really has meant a need to focus on safety, really watching out that the area underneath each of that ductwork is clear. That means baggage claim, ticket lobby, mezzanine levels are all closed off for safety in that window in the middle of the night. The team's really been doing a great job. I met with a number of them late last week to just go through sort of the process and how it's been going. I'm really proud of them and grateful for their focus on safety. This process is going to end by August 13th, as long as there aren't any new weather or logistical issues. The size of this crane means that if the wind is above a certain speed, you can't do any pick that evening. So every afternoon, our team is monitoring both the weather and wind and also what's going on site to make sure we can finish those picks safely. And again, I'm just really grateful for the work of the team. That, Madam President, concludes my remarks for the day. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you very much, Curtis. Do we have any questions or comments for the Executive Director on his report? Okay, sorry, just one moment. I see a hand up and I want to make sure Commissioner Nemi.
Thank you, Madam President. I just want to remark, I flew for the first time last week with my son, and you know, despite all the construction that's happening in the airport, he was just said to me, he's like, I really love our airport. He's like, it feels like a place. He's like, you go to other airports and other cities and it doesn't really feel like a place or a place that you wanted to be. So, you know, just wanted to share those positive thoughts. And I think the team's doing a great job of managing that construction inside the terminal. I'm curious, and I know Commissioner Lamb isn't here today, but I'm curious if there's been an impact on the airport vendors with the cross-terminal corridor being closed down, and how that's going, because I know folks are probably glad to be reopened and at least seeing an increase in air travel.
There has been, and thank you, Commissioner, for the question and for the comment. I'm going to ask Dan Pippinger to hop on here in just a second, our Chief Operating Officer, and give you a little bit more about the logistics of the move and our existing concessionaires. We've really tried to focus on how to keep folks both safe and operating inside. And so I'll ask Dan in just a second. I do want to note to your first point about the complement. Our team, as we think about TCOR, is really focused on that point about does it feel like home? Does it feel like Portland? And so I really appreciate the comment. You know, I think a real fail for us in designing of a new facility would be people walk in and say, well, I could be anywhere, right? This might be Roanoke or Tallahassee or whatever, right? We really want it to feel like something that people recognize and identify with. So thank you for that. Dan Pippinger, are you available to?
I am.
Thank you.
I am. Thanks for the question and the comment, Commissioner Deemy. I agree with Curtis fully. I flew back last night from Chicago, and when you're in another airport, you look around quite a bit, and I thought, I could be anywhere, except for the thunderstorm outside that delayed me for 3 hours. That was Chicago. We don't think that we're having a big impact because we balanced the terminal with the Concourse E extension. So while the cross Concourse connector is out, we balanced the passenger loads between north-south to almost 50-50 pre-pandemic, of course. So one of the points there was to bring more customers to the north side of the airport because we were about 70% on the south side. So that move last June really balanced it out and provided kind of equal opportunity for the concessionaires. So we don't think it's a big issue right now. And we don't think, right now there's no way to get between it. You have to go through security if you're connecting. And we think it's a very small number. We're certainly poised to do something different if we find that number gets bigger. But because of the different airlines and how they share codes or don't, we think it's a pretty balanced approach right now. I think the concessionaires are still struggling right now for labor, as many businesses are, both in our community and across the nation. And so we still see some limited hours, but with 75% of passengers from 2019, we're seeing much better business at the concessionaires. So I think they're doing okay right now in an overall sense, right? I'm not, I guess, being specific to each one.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. I should say we had an out-of-town visitor, a young person who entered my house and commented on how great the airport was. And we all thought he was just trying to give me a hard time about the construction, but he actually didn't know of my affiliation with the port and went on to tell me how great the airport was, much better than any airport he'd been in. And that was in the midst of the construction. So kudos to everybody who's working so hard to make the passenger experience there worthwhile during this time. I see we have a Commissioner Alexander.
Yes, Madam President. Just a quick question for Curtis or Dan. You know, periodically we will read articles about airlines having disruptive passengers and it having to result in displacement of people at airports using local police or airport security. Have we seen an incident? I mean, these are, glaring kind of situations, but has any of that sort of found its way to us in terms of having to be involved in those types of encounters?
Yeah, in short, and Dan, I'll throw it over to you. We've always had those, Commissioner, and we do have, of course, our own police are on site. They have done very well to help manage and work on these situations, and the number of incidents has increased nationally, and I would say our own airport staff have noticed them as well, and our own police, the incidents oftentimes connected to alcohol. But I wouldn't say we've had any noteworthy new accidents, although I'll lean over on Dan Pippinger, if you would. Dan, anything noteworthy to add there?
No, nothing noteworthy. We've had a couple calls where we have to go out and provide a presence, but we just haven't experienced the, viral video events that we see all the time on the news. So it's been pretty quiet at PDX. And as I've mentioned, I think before, compliance with the mask requirement is very high. Usually the issue is more people just letting it slip down their face, not wantonly not wanting to wear it. So I feel pretty good about where we are. I would note a flight to PDX, I think, was diverted maybe a month ago, but it wasn't an incident here. And I don't recall even the airline or the point of origin, but I did note that a PDX flight was diverted, but we haven't seen it here at the airport itself.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions on the executive director's report? Okay, seeing none, I'll call for motion and second for executive director's report. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Thank you. Pam, would you lead us through the roll call?
Commissioner Alexander,
Aye.
Comas,
Aye.
Levy,
Aye.
McDonald,
Aye.
Nemi,
Aye.
O'Halloran,
Aye.
Sumput,
Aye.
and Strader.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. We didn't receive any public comments for this meeting this month, so we will move on to our consent item. And I'll ask if any commissioner wants a presentation on the consent item, which is titled Amendment of Portland Bylaws. And anyone, Commissioner Nemi?
I would just like to make a comment about it before we do the vote on it.
Absolutely, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I understand the need to modify the bylaws to make sure that we're reflecting even this meeting that we're having right now and and not meeting in the office, and alternately the ability to meet somewhere else. I would like to say that once it's safe for us to meet in person, I would like to be able to do that again. I think that the access for people to be able to attend the meetings, actually see commissioners, which other than these pictures that are up on the PowerPoint right now, you know, anybody that's listening in or watching actually doesn't even see us here. And I've heard from people who've given testimony that it can be quite cumbersome to figure out the technical logistics to be able to speak to commission. And so just want to say that, you know, I will be in favor of this consent item, but I also want to make sure that it's not saying that we won't meet again in person when we're able to safely.
Thank you for that, Commissioner. I would say I agree and look forward to us being able to meet in person. Again, I do think it provides sort of greater opportunity for us to connect and have fulsome conversations and meet with the community. I also appreciate, on the other hand, being able to maintain a channel in which people can connect with us if they can't come to the meeting. So from that perspective, I'm in favor of this amendment, but completely agree with your comment about in-person meetings, hopefully at some point. Any other comments or questions? Okay, I'll call for motion and second for approval of the consent item.
So moved. Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Pam, would you lead us through the roll call vote, please?
Commissioners Alexander,
Aye.
Comas,
Aye.
Levy,
Aye.
McDonald,
Aye.
Nemi,
Aye.
O'Halloran,
Aye.
Sumput,
Aye.
and Strader.
Aye.
Thank you. Bobby Stedman will be introducing our first agenda item.
Thank you, Commission President. This agenda item requests approval to enter into a master services agreement with IBM Corporation for information technology or IT managed services. This agreement will allow the port's IT department to transition several functions to IBM that are currently performed by port employees, allowing those employees to focus on work that only the port can do. Contracting out these functions to a qualified managed service provider was one of several recommendations and noted and also being pursued during an organizational assessment that we had conducted by a consulting firm in 2018. The primary need for this agreement is really to ensure resiliency across our most critical IT infrastructure 24/7, 365 days a year. With me here today is Mark Grenke. Mark is the Port's Chief Information Officer, and he will provide more information about this request. Mark?
Thank you, Bobby. Next slide, please. So thank you for your time this morning. I am here to request your approval to award an agreement with IBM Corporation for what we refer to as IT Infrastructure Managed Services. This is for an initial term of approximately 5.5 years, and then the option to extend the term at 1-year increments for 3 years. The total amount not to exceed $22.167 million. Next slide, please. So for project background, it's important to notice that most of the labor provided for technology support the Port is provided by internal Port staff. As Bobby mentioned, we had an organizational assessment that was conducted in 2018, and it identified a significant risk to what we refer to as resiliency to Port operations, really primarily due just to insufficient staffing level for that. And to kind of elaborate on that, the consultant identified, over the years, we've grown our IT infrastructure, exponentially, but we haven't had a corresponding growth in IT headcount. Obviously, running an airport and marine terminals, we have 24/7 critical business operations, but in reality, we're currently staffed with teams that primarily are for 8x5 support. That leaves us at risk for significant outages. Staff aren't unavailable because we don't have the depth of staff coverages. And then what we're relying on, what's very unsustainable is this really staff heroics, particularly when we're dealing with any kind of outage after hours. It's the same staff that are expected to be here during, the normal work hours that are often responding to these things after hours, and it's really unsustainable. And then ultimately, I think we've dodged a lot of bullets as far as being able to cover the infrastructure. The consultant was pretty amazed at what we've been able to get accomplished with existing staff, but we have a risk that if we have a significant outage, it could impact our revenue. It could cause delayed flights. It could even cause something as concerning as a security breach. So the consultant recommended that we actually contract with a qualified third-party provider rather than increasing our internal headcount. They believe we can provide those functions, really staff them on a 24/7, 365 basis, lower than we could do overall costs with existing internal staff. And then really what our goal is to allow our internal staff to focus on those items that are really more higher value to the business and really focusing more on innovation. Next slide, please. So we conducted a competitive solicitation between October of 2020 and March 2021, and we had a high bar for the vendors to be able to propose for this, and because we run critical infrastructure and we want to make sure that it's managed appropriately and we're not taking risks by transitioning that to unqualified provider. There were 4 vendors that submitted responsive proposals. You can see them there: DXC, IBM, Tata Consultancy, and a firm known as Wipro. And we had 7 areas of where we scored the proposals. And this is a complex solicitation. My 35 years of experience, it's really the most complex one I've ever been involved in. And again, it's because we want to make sure we do this right. This is not something that we want to have to back out from. And you can see the financial profile is pretty small. It's the vendor's qualifications and our comfort level of them being able to support our critical infrastructure. That's really what's most important. Next page, please. So given the complexity that I mentioned and the high expense of this contract, we did engage a third-party consulting firm, Gartner. They were really to assist us and the evaluation committee that consisted of our IT governance team, which is comprised of 4 of our port executives, and they helped us with not only the evaluation and scoring of the proposal, but also negotiating favorable contract terms. Ultimately, IBM was the highest scoring proposal of the 4. Next page. So for the contract scope of work, the first 6 months are actually what we call the transition period, and that's when we transition those functions that we're currently providing with internal staff to the provider staff. The areas, like the scope of work, are what I refer to these 3 service towers. It's data center services, which are primarily supporting the on-premise computer servers and the data storage. The other service tower is what we refer to as data network services. That's really all the networking gear that allows all the systems to connect together. And then lastly, we have a voice network, and that primarily consists of the telephone switch and the various handsets that we have throughout the facilities. The contract term contemplates up to 8 years of what we call steady state maintenance services. That's when the managed service provider actually provides that 24/7/365 support. We've also included optional services. These would be for professional services that we could do on an as-needed basis with an hourly rate that we negotiated, pre-negotiated as part of the contract. Next page, please. I wanted to report on the small business participation and social equity. I'm quite pleased to announce that IBM's committed to a 6% SBE goal, and they've actually are partnering with one of our local certified minority-owned businesses who actually was a graduate of the Port's Mentor Protege program. And we've also added some contract terms that put in steps that would need to be taken, due diligence steps, if for some reason IBM feels that they need to make an adjustment to that goal. There's escalation steps that really ensure that there's due diligence. I mean, it's important to understand that with our contract with IBM, if their service levels deteriorate, then there's a financial penalty then that they have to reduce our costs. If that was a result of, say, the subcontractor that was one of the minority-owned businesses, well, IBM would have an interest in resolving that issue. Well, we understand that, but we don't want them to make that decision unilaterally. So there's terms in the contract that ensure that they work with us and escalate those decisions. If indeed they have to make changes to their small business participation, we want to work with them to identify perhaps an alternate or any steps that we can do to hold them accountable to that goal that they proposed during their solicitation. Also want to just highlight some of the long list of commitments to social equity that IBM identified. Supplier diversity has been extremely important for them. They've got a half-century experience in that. They're committed to supporting Oregon schools and nonprofits through grants. And then we're pleased with what they're doing around supporting our disabled individuals, the public, with their Human Ability and Accessibility Center. Next slide. So this is the breakdown of the not to exceed costs. I mentioned we expect about 6 months to transition those services. So that's for the first line item. And then there's 5 annual service steady state service years, and then the 3 optional years, additional years that bring it a total of 8 steady state years of service. I wanted to just kind of highlight some components of this budget. We've negotiated to support inflationary factor. It would be capped at 2.8%. So those are considered in these budget costs. But if inflation happens to be below, we'd actually pay the actual inflation rate. I've also included added up to $500,000 annually to support adjustments we pay based on quantities of things like equipment. If our actual usage is higher than our forecasted quantities, then we'd have to pay a per unit cost fee. And then I mentioned this potential to contract or do on-call professional services through task orders. This would contemplate that. Also want to mention how this is funded. IT is a general fund overhead department. That's how we receive our funds, but essentially there's a weighted allocation through aviation and general fund business lines based on their consumptions of our services. Next slide, please. So I am recommending approval of the executive director's recommendation, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. Do we have questions? Commissioner Sunput.
Yes. It looks like a well thought through proposal, including kind of protection on cost escalations and use of services. I expect that this is only services and our capital equipment is still the port's capital equipment. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And I would also expect that somewhere in this 5 to 8 year time frame, we will go through a capital refresh. We might consider moving some services from our data center into a cloud service to optimize things, reduce costs, etc. How does that factor in as things evolve over the years?
Yeah, great question. We do have a complex spreadsheet that shows what our forecasted unit quantities are for various line items that equate to each of those service towers. So, for example, for data storage and data networks, we show a trend down over the next several years where we expect to transition our infrastructure service, primarily the compute and storage, over to cloud service providers, primarily infrastructure as a service. So that is actually reflected in the complex forecasting spreadsheet we used.
Okay, well, that's good to know that you are forecasting a transition from capital equipment be owned to cloud services.
Correct.
Thank you.
Commissioner Alexander.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. And actually, this is piggybacking on Commissioner Sampat's observation. I think those of us who have been in large, complex organization environments for decades have sort of seen a shifting periodically to moving some of these services in-house versus contracting them out-house. And I'm glad to see we have the flexibility to evaluate that. So I would just piggyback on the observation from Commissioner Sampat. The other is that I would like to offer validation of the posture that IBM has made in terms of issues of equity and minority contracting. They have been a best practice for 40 years. There's a legendary leader, Ted Childs, who led this work not only for IBM, but within the industry. And as a young administrator in the 80s, was somebody who I really looked to sort of chart this path that had really not been paved in a very aggressive way. So they are a great partner to have in this work, who have a set of shared values that they've demonstrated over a long period of time. So I commend the decision that allows us to both live and learn from them going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Strader.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. If you could give maybe a little more detail on how it affects the current employees that are direct employees with the port. And one more point would be, within the contract on an annual basis, is there a mechanism to score the service and the needs as they change to make sure that it's consistent with the direction that the port wants to move, whether it be for equity purposes or service purposes?
Great questions. Thank you for those. So regarding the existing staff, we started this journey about 2 years ago, and I feel very proud that we were very transparent with the staff that ultimately are impacted. There turned out to be a total of 5 staff, and so we started our discussions with them as long as 2 years ago. As far as those 5 staff, 3 of them have already found alternate positions. Those are outside the organization. And 1, we actually extended a job offer to internally as a lateral. So that leaves 1 employee. And so I think we've taken steps. I think we've done due diligence to be transparent and treat our employees the way they should be treated. And you had another question about holding the vendor accountable. So, I mean, I think that's one thing that the contract's very strong. There's terms that I mentioned in there specifically about service levels. So we've identified what our service level requirements are. For example, specific uptimes for systems, whether it's 99.9% of uptime, and if the vendor can't maintain those uptimes, then there's a financial penalty for them to address, and so it holds them accountable to meeting our service levels. We also have the ability to do a benchmark of service levels and rates on is every year if we want, and it's actually the costs are split with IBM, and it ensures that with the cost reductions we anticipate over the years through the commodity of service, that it gives us the ability to renegotiate those rates based on the fact that the market is if we can demonstrate the market shows a reduced cost over what we're currently paying.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see Bobby Stedman has a comment.
Thank you, and thank you, Commissioner Strader, for the question about employees. I appreciate the concern, and also, as Mark mentioned, we've been really transparent with folks. I also wanted to let you know that we offered retention bonuses for those staff that have been impacted, that stay for the duration of the transition. And as Mark pointed out, we only have 1 employee at this point that would be impacted. And we would, as we make this transition, we're hopeful that there might be a role for this person within IBM as we make the transition. So we'll certainly be following up with them to see if there's opportunities for that remaining employee.
Thank you. I have a question just about data security, system security. Assume that was well thought of, and obviously IBM is a good partner, but just wanted some background on the thinking around sending this out and how that impacts data security.
Great question. So we had our information security manager as part of the individuals who's setting the requirements for IBM. And so we have a very detailed it's a RACI diagram. Those are the things that IBM is going to be responsible for. And then we're responsible. For example, we process generally around 50 million in credit card transactions just for parking. And so IBM is going to play a role in that. And so there are certain things that we made sure that IBM has certification for the payment card industry data security standards. And we were very clear on delineating what their roles are versus port staff roles, because we're not contracting out really security oversight. That stays internally with us. And then lastly, we have really robust insurance requirements for IBM to meet if for some reason there's negligence or any kind of data breach that we contribute to IBM. There's a big role that they would play in covering any costs that we have related to it, and then also just our understanding and exposure to the steps that they take about maintaining security with their employees and their environment. That was part of our scoring of them as a vendor as well.
Great, thank you very much. I don't see any further questions at the moment, so I'll ask for a motion and second to approve the executive director's recommendation.
Move to approve the executive director's recommendation.
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, I'll note that Commissioner McDonald had to leave the meeting, but Pam, if you could lead us through the vote, please.
Commissioners Alexander,
Aye.
Kupro-Comas,
Aye.
Levy, Commissioner Levy,
Aye.
Nemi,
Aye.
O'Halloran,
Aye.
Sampat,
Aye.
and Strader.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll call on Chris Neal to introduce our last agenda item.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So good morning, commissioners. As you know, and we talked about a little bit earlier, and it warmed my heart, we are building an airport that this region is going to be extremely proud of. And I really do appreciate the comments earlier, especially before we even get into this presentation. I'm not sure how often that happens, but thank you for all the good comments earlier. We've brought some photos here today to show you some of the enormous progress that we've made over the last year. These include the brand new roof, which is amazing, the Oregon Market, and most recently the crane work on the existing roof that we've got going on. And Curtis took all that thunder earlier in the meeting, so thank you for that, sir. I had it all lined up here, but no need. But as you can also imagine, we're not just here to show photos from our T-Core scrapbook. We do have two asks for you. Number one, it's a task order to keep testing and inspections and things like that going for our work. And then number two, construction administration dollars from ZGF to continue with our design work. And so here to make those requests of you in the presentation is our PM for T-Core, George Seaman. George, the floor is yours, sir.
Thanks, Chris. Next slide, please. As Chris had talked about, we're really two actions today. The first is for special testing and inspections for about $680 million, and an amendment for ZGF to finish a couple of small design items, but predominantly the construction administration services for the project for about $23.5 million. Next slide. So a couple of images that Chris had talked about. Here's an image. If you drive down Marine Drive now, I think it's pretty impressive. You can start seeing the roof being constructed in near the fire station. So this image, we've got in the main section of the terminal building 6 girders and then 5 sections of glulam beams that fit it up. So we're in the middle of the terminal. We've constructed the glulam beams, and this is kind of the western look of the ticket lobby. Next slide. And here's an overhead view, kind of the same look. About 2 weeks ago, I really like this picture because it shows the progression of the work. The staff is working from left to right here, but if you look at the far right-hand side, you can see some of the glulam beams with the exposed steel roof decking going on. And then as you keep going over, you see the glulam being in. And this was about 2 weeks old. They've already filled in most of the glulam and the mass plywood in that center section. And then you can see the roof going in, the size of some of the skylights. And the far left-hand side isn't a skylight. That's where the mezzanine is going to be. But it's pretty impressive to get an opportunity to go out there. Next slide. We had actually a topping off ceremony yesterday. Ironworkers finished up the last of this major steel work that's going to go in the roof. So lifted one of the ring beams that's holding up the skylight area. So he also celebrated about 1.25 million man hours of work, craft hours of work overall on the project yesterday. So at this point in time, the roof will continue to construct, but most of the iron workers will go away here for a while until we actually build then some of the infill of the western expansion. Next slide. So here's a couple of views of the alleyway. Curtis had talked about the crane. So there's the crane down, 600-ton crane. I think it was about 300 feet tall at its peak as we lifted up some of the duct work. Most of the utility work on this side, this is looking from D2, is complete. So the services have been moved out of the western expansion. Next slide.
and then looking at the other side of the alleyway. If you remember a few months ago, this was a big hole from the freeze pit. The freeze pit has now been decommissioned. It's being backfilled, and this is probably a week and a half old. Most of that area is backfilled. Maybe about a week old. Most of the area has been backfilled, and it will continue to backfill, finish up the utilities, and then in about a month or so, we'll start doing drilling of piles in that area to support the roof. Next slide. And then Curtis talked about the roof ductwork going on over about the last week or so. It's either going to finish tonight or tomorrow. The crane picked up the ductwork, dropped it in place. As you walk through the terminal building, you'll see the ticket lobby, you'll see a lot of scaffolding in place. Well, the scaffolding in place is to finish up the work for the steel and to support this ductwork. And ultimately, this ductwork, all the air handlers that feed the ticket lobby are in the construction zone. So they're back behind the ticket counters. When we complete this ductwork, complete connecting it to some new air handlers, or some existing air handlers are sitting over the far south end of the ticket lobby, we'll then be able to complete the demolition of the rest of the Oregon Market area. Most of this work here, at least for the terminal lift, should be done either tonight or tomorrow night. I think Curtis mentioned there was some wind limitations. I think with this size crane, this length of a pick, it was 10.4 miles an hour. So we had to actually schedule it. Luckily, we were here in the summer when it is pretty mild from wind perspective. But in reality, this is really just the appetizer. Starting next spring, as we start lifting the Y columns in, the shoring towers to erect the roof, and then moving the roof over itself, we'll end up with a 900-ton crane for the Y columns. This ductwork weighed about 20,000 pounds. The Y columns will weigh about 85,000 pounds, and then the roof modules itself will be moved over about 1 million pounds each. So a lot to come on this. Next slide, please. And then we talked about the Oregon Market demolition. So these are a couple of images. If you were kind of standing where the clock tower is, looking north and looking south, you can see the demolition. So we've done a lot of the, call it soft demolitions. You're not taking the structure out yet. These were all the concessionaires there in the Oregon Market area. A lot of that's been out back behind it. You're looking at where the food court is. A lot of that is already out. So we're now in the process of continuing demolition. Pretty soon in this area, we'll start putting, to a point, a new roof on the floor, because as we rip out the old building and demo the old building, the floor you see here becomes the roof of the bag claim area. This will be exposed to the atmosphere. So once we get that ductwork complete and the comm center is moved out of the mezzanine, we'll be able to start demoing the rest of the building and the structure, which should be complete by, I believe, next February. Next slide. So overall schedule, I think this is 22nd or 23rd time we've been to commission for agenda items. We'll still have a few more upcoming. Design is scheduled to be complete here in the next month. A couple little things will still be hanging out there, but 99% complete in this month. We should be establishing the construction team will then take the design out to bid. We'll evaluate the bids and establish a GMP, probably January timeframe. Looks like we're going to hold to GMP. We'll be back to commission for that remaining portion of work. Big picture, Concourse B is on schedule for a November turnover. And then as you see all the construction activities, we're planning on the western expansion and ticket lobby, turning over towards the end of 2023. Next slide. So we've been to commission a number of times for the ZGF contract amendment. I like this slide as it shows that we've actually been here almost 6 years in design activities with ZGF, from the initial conception to schematic design in 2017. 2018-19, we were back for the Concourse B design, and then really the big final design developments started in April of 19. with the phase 1 final construction documents, and then really we've just been amending the contract to complete that work. At this point, it's about $148.5 million. Next slide. Anticipate being back for additional construction administration contracts to commission sometime over the next 3 or 4 years. We've got to have it sequenced here in about a once a year manner. We're still working exactly as we see how we're trending and tracking costs, how much it is, and exact timing, but it should be about another $20 million over the next 3 years. Next slide. Overall project budget, we're tracking to the $1.65 billion. Contingency is about $125 million. One thing I wanted to point out is we've spent, this slide doesn't really show, but we've spent about $550 million to date on the project. So if you think about the $126 million, that's based on $1.1 million to go, so it's about 11%. Still a lot of risk out there with the demolition of the overall project, but we feel that's an appropriate level of contingency to complete the project. With this amendment for ZGF, their small business participation goal is 10%, and with this amendment, they'll still maintain just about exactly 10%. Next slide. So the 2 project contracts we're bringing today, the first is for PSI for testing and inspection. Last year, Commission approved about a $2 million contract for them. This is a new task order for new scope. We have budgeted about $2.5 to $2.6 million, so we're right on budget. This isn't new scope. It's just as design has progressed, the work is, the scope has been defined enough that we could then get detailed quotes on it. From the ZGF contract, with this amendment, their contract will be about $172 million overall. Next slide, please. And we recommend approval of the 2 agenda items here. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, George. Exciting to see that progress, and thank you for the detailed presentation, particularly on where we are financially as well. Any questions from Commission? Okay, I think we've gotten used to voting on these items. I'll call for a motion and second to approve the Executive Director's recommendation.
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you. Pam, would you lead us through the vote, please?
Commissioners Alexander,
Aye.
Kouprokomis,
Aye.
Levy,
Aye.
Nimi,
Aye.
O'Halloran,
Aye.
Sampat,
Aye.
and Strader.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It looks like we have a comment from Commissioner Alexander.
Yes, Madam President, I didn't want to interrupt the presentation, but this is sort of a carryover from Commissioner Nemi's comment about this place looking and feeling like Portland. I'm curious, with all of this construction that's going on, what are we doing with the carpet? I'm sure it's raised. What are we doing with the carpet?
Chris?
Oh I wanted to give this one to you, sir, because it's been a nice little arm wrestling battle. We are going to maintain 3 different types of carpet, to be honest with you. So the 2 types that we have now, Flight 1, Flight 2, and then we're also going to some of the traditional classic, Curtis and I like to call it throwback carpet, is going to be represented back up in the front when you first walk into the building. So we're really excited about that. So excellent question, sir. I was not prepared for you to ask that, but here we are.
Well, I would offer this caution. You dance with who brung you. That's all I'm going to say.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Any other comments? All right, seeing none, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.